Hey yo, what's good, man? We are back with another episode of the Real Rap Coalition podcast, man. This is episode 4. My name is Showtime Slim. Who else we got in the building today, man?
Motherfucking Black Roots, man. Back again.
It's Bob Celeste, legend shit. You already know we are not affiliated with the Maniac.
All right, man. So today's movie was recommended by Bob Celeste. So I'm gonna let Bob go ahead and introduce the movie, give a little summary of it, man.
All right, so this week, if you were tuned into the last podcast, we dropped a little bombshell pick for this week, a movie that was highly revered, but I couldn't really understand because I had watched it so long ago that I feel like I didn't really get an impact. So I wanted to give this one a try. 2010, Shutter Island. You know what I'm saying? Noir, psychological film here, a mystery, a drama. And in a lot of ways too, a thriller. Um, we had Leonardo DiCaprio starring role. He's gonna play a U.S. Army Marshal, somebody who is elevated to a particular position by his successes in war in the past. He's there with a partner, a new partner that he hasn't worked with before, a young, astute man who seems to be obedient, seems to be, interested just as he is in figuring out what's going on an island dedicated to a psychiatric holding facility. That's Shutter Island. Um, Shutter Island is supposed to have the worst criminals, the worst offenders that go there. Um, but the owner of this psychiatric facility has a vision of mental health that was unheard of. The story takes place in 1950, a time that was grim in our country, not only for issues of civil rights, but also for mental health treatment, as we were in a time of shock therapy for things like depression and anxiety. We were in a time of extreme squalor in holding conditions, people living in their own shit, basically. These were things that were common at that time, and this movie definitely encapsulates that well. But essentially, what we have here is the story of a patient that has escaped. A patient has gotten off Shutter Island, a well-guarded, with a near militaristic detail protecting and monitoring it at all times. And it seems to be the case that nobody really knows where this person's gone or how they could have gotten out. They don't even seem to know much about the person besides small recollections. But ultimately, Shutter Island is a story of our marshal and his partner trying to get to the bottom of how it is that this person could escape. And further, what exactly is going on this psychiatric facility? What makes it so notorious? So it was a great movie, first and foremost, and I'm sure there's a lot of thoughts about it. How do you guys want to tackle this? Do we want to talk about our characters first? Do we want to talk about these actors, what they did good, what they didn't do good, if we can even say?
I'll just say, like, I think all of the main actors, we had a few main characters. We had Leonardo DiCaprio's character, of course, Teddy, Mark Ruffalo. Everybody is familiar with Mark Ruffalo. Pretty much, he
real quick.
Mhm.
I've seen this movie in pieces prior to watching it, yesterday for the pod and whatnot.
Mhm.
And I never noticed that was him, right?
Mm.
And so my kind of introduction to Mark Ruffalo was him being the Hulk in Avengers.
Right.
Okay.
But
And
this
yeah,
nigga is a very good actor, bro.
he's a good actor, and I think I probably saw Hulk and Avengers before I even saw this shit too. So I kind of saw the Hulk, even though this movie came out first. I saw the Hulk, him playing the Hulk in the Marvel universe, and then I had to come back and see this movie. So seeing him play roles outside of the Hulk is definitely interesting. I've seen a few, and I think he was very, very good in this role that he played.
Right.
Same with Ben Kingsley, who was the he was like the head
Dr.
doctor
Cawley,
over
right?
Dr. Cawley. He was like the head doctor in charge. I think he played his character very well too. I think it was like stellar performances from across the board, pretty much.
Right. I
Yeah.
think these characters were excellently, um, perfected with like the way that their expressions were written in. I think a lot goes on with the kind of like emotions that are like provoked like by the actors when you catch them on like a freeze frame, or when they get into a situation. It seems like one thing that at least I can definitely say Leo did really well was always knowing how to look perfectly disturbed, you know,
Mhm.
perfectly confused, perfectly
Mm-hmm.
anxious. Like he seemed to capture that really well. I think he played this role at the level or even better than I think our main character in the accountant played his character. I think that every character that had a role in this movie was extremely deliberate. So I never felt like there was a featherweight sort of performance going on. Even the crazy people in the institution didn't seem
Mhm.
forced. They didn't
Right,
seem,
right.
like corny, like caricatures of what we know, like insanity looks like. It seems like they did a really good job of just making everybody feel purposeful, at least from a performance standpoint.
Also, spoiler alert right here. So there will be spoilers if you haven't seen the movie yet. You cut it off right here. Go watch the movie, then come back.
Yeah, and
So,
you're gonna want to watch this one for sure.
all right, man. Go ahead.
Um, so, real quick, do y'all want to do this kind of orderly where we go from start to finish, or can we jump around, or what y'all want to do?
We did the spoiler alert. They should have watched the movie.
Okay, well,
We have a good idea of where the plot is at. So
okay. So,
let's
oh, go ahead, my.
if we can, let's first talk about kind of the exposition and how believable, how much impact did this setting have. So we have, the psychiatric facility. A lot of movies do have this premise of like the isolated, don't go there kind of place, and then our characters are brought in there and they have some type of role. Um so how do we feel about this setting, our characters like safety in it, their place in it or whatever, and how's that like kind of evolved during the movie?
I'm sorry. Say that one more time.
Slow
So
it
nah,
down
Just
real
the
quick.
last part. I
look,
was reading something in which
nah,
I'm gonna touch on
I
later
feel
on, but
you. I feel you. But in the same way we got like video games, they world build, right? They create a setting
right,
where
right,
it's
right.
like to be immersed in that world is significant. What do we think about the world they've kind of built in Shutter Island? How do you feel while you're watching this situation? Like, what does the
Oh,
setting
it
do
was
for you?
perfect. It was perfect
No,
for
most
the type
definitely.
of movie it is and the theme and everything. It was perfect. The how they had the storm throughout it. They started. I I found this out today. I was reading and they actually started the movie out with like the little horror music, which is when they was on the boat, they had like the little horror music playing in the background during
Yes.
the
Yeah.
that's actually a song that they played throughout the Shining movie, and so that's a song that they used throughout that entire movie, and I guess they just used it in the beginning of this movie to kind of set the tone. I think they might have used it throughout this movie too.
That's
Now that I think
interesting
about it,
because The Shining is also
So
like a psychological horror, right?
facts. It kind of
so
sets the mood. That type of shit sets the mood.
so there's a thing about the music, right? There's really only two or three songs that they play throughout this movie, and they're on repeat.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the 1950s, so they have record players, right?
Right.
It seems as if, because if anybody has seen the movie, in which I hope you have, uh, there are times where the goal of the doctor and the partner, which really wasn't his partner, ended up his psychologist. Their goal
Yeah.
is to reintroduce him to his real self.
Mm-hmm.
And
To kind
throughout
of
the movie, they're playing, and I wish I knew the name of the song, but on the records, they're playing. There was one that is like a opera symphony type
Yeah.
song, and then
Yeah.
there's
yeah.
another song that, well, I'm guessing was popular around that time. And they're playing these because there's a scene. where we take a look at Teddy's past, and this was the song that was playing while they were raiding the Nazis'
Okay, yeah,
concentration camp.
yeah.
So they're playing that at one point, and then the other one they're playing is actually a record that was being played when he came home to the
His
crime
wife.
that his wife had committed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I know
So,
I don't know which song it was. One of those songs you're referring to, there was a scene where he walked into the mental institution and there was a comment about some of the music that was playing. He was able to
mhm.
directly, point out what the
Yes.
song was.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
corrected
so
the
that's when they're introduced to Dr. Cawley's house, and they
Mm-hmm.
go in the little lounge area, and it's being played. And
Yeah,
in
yeah.
which it's crazy how everything is intentional, and they make so everything that they write for the movie is intentional to the
Facts.
point that to the story or the objective of the doctor and the psychologist, they're intentionally giving him points to kind of remember things.
Mm-hmm.
So
right.
the psychologist asked, saying what he said, knowing that hearing the music is already triggering Teddy to think.
Sure.
Right.
He
Right.
asked
So
the question to get him to verbalize what he's thinking.
that, you know what, that is definitely true. I think sound was used very well in this movie for sure, right? But when I talk about the setting of the movie, I don't even think that the content of it, like what it means to us, is even
Mhm,
all that important when we talk about the movie being good. Because think about it, we're set in the 1950s, so even things
mhm,
like their cigarette use, their character, right? The
mhm.
garb of the staff at the medical, at a medical institution. Nowadays, they'd be wearing scrubs and Crocs, right? But in
Yeah,
that movie, they're adorned in kind of like the housemaid-esque sort of fashion at the time, right? Um,
yeah,
the idea of like a wealthy institution nowadays would look very ergonomic and like extremely civilized and technological, but they also captured the essence of that time in the architecture and the scenery and surroundings.
right.
Right. And so I think that from a setting perspective, I definitely felt immersed in the world that they created with this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Most definitely. Nah,
Um,
the just the how how isolated they made the island look looking at the island because they you get a full picture of the island, or at least the front part, the entrance part, when they arrive, right? So
right.
Right.
they're looking at the island when they're coming up on the ferry, and you can see how secluded it is, right?
Right.
And then you get them throughout the movie, they're exploring around this small island, and there's only a few places that they can go.
Right.
So just that feeling of being trapped at times because
Mm-hmm.
you can't there's three wards. There's the house that the doctor lives in, and there's the lighthouse, and that's it.
Right. So, I mean, we pretty much exhausted, I guess the setting here, because I think we all agree that they did a good job of creating a world for a viewer to like feel like they're involved with what's going on to some extent, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, but you know what's funny, because I think the real essence of this movie is the ever winding, circuit, kind of plot that we have working, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mhm.
Roots brought up earlier, the fact that at the end, the assistant didn't actually happen to be his partner. It was actually, the psychiatrist and stuff. But we understand that this is perspective, right? And the way that it becomes an open-ended problem begins with how they frame the movie. We start out
Mhm.
just from the perspective of him coming to the island. So this is already being fed to us as a fact. Him coming and interacting with the people there and learning more and more about the place, his interaction with the doctor at his house. We're given this as like, a linear progression of real things happening, right? But
Right, right.
at a certain point, right, especially after his major episode, um, right, and he wakes up in the place where everybody else is sleeping or whatever, right? We
Yep, I know what
get
you're
this
talking about.
we get this split, right? Where now he's having these dreams. He sees, the image of this girl. It's like now the rules of the world have changed. So one thing I
Mhm.
want to point out with this movie is that it shifts from being a linear progression of real things happening to I'm not sure if what's happening is
What's
actually
real?
Is
happening.
Yeah,
real. Yeah.
Right. But what do you guys
yeah.
think
So
about that
like,
though? Like, because I don't see this in a lot of movies, right? So what do you guys think
mhm.
about how they shifted the viewer perspective right there?
So it's like you can see what's going on. You can take that for face value, but they're hinting at something going on in the background throughout the movie, right? I think the first hint that we get, the official hint that we get, is when they're talking to the woman. I wish I could go ahead and find her name real quick. But
Mhm.
The one that they said
whenever they
was
were,
the patient that ran away.
no, not her. So they didn't actually physically talk to her until a little bit later when they're doing the interrogation of the patients that were also in the group
Oh,
therapy that they
yeah,
said
yeah,
Rachel was in. They spoke to a male and they spoke to a female. When they
yeah.
spoke to the female, you kind of start to see her kind of veer off from the conversation at times
You're
where
speaking about the
she's
one that wrote on the paper that said run.
Yes.
She wrote run.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. In which that scene was so great. Her acting itself was so great because you
Facts.
see her again just the same way as the whole entire movie was, where it starts one way and then slowly shifts into another lane as it progresses, and then you
Right.
get the final. Clearly, something's going on because she asked for the cup of water. What's his name? What's his name? The partner's name?
You
Brooks
talking
said.
about
Mark Ruffalo's character.
Yeah.
They don't
Mark
have his
Ruffalo.
fucking name, but
Yeah.
his name was forgot
oh,
his
Chuck,
fucking name.
Chuck, Chuck, Chuck.
Yeah, Chuck.
It was
Okay.
Chuck. So the woman asks for a glass of water. Chuck gets up to go and get the water. She snatches the notebook from Teddy and writes on it "run." So there's
Right.
clearly something going on. And that's our kind of introduction to there's okay. So like either these people are in on this and she's not okay with it, or maybe she just is crazy.
It was building
Because
tension with the
exactly. In
Yeah.
which the crazy thing about it, because there was something that was mentioned in later on when he was talking to the real Rachel, whatever her name is, where she said she was actually a doctor and then she got admitted in because she got too much.
yeah,
She had too many questions, right?
yeah,
She
the
made a
one in the
statement
cave.
that says the more people call you no, I'm sorry, the more once you're declared as insane,
Get it
the more
together.
you the more you deny that you're insane, the more insane you look. So it's
Right.
just a
Right.
constant loop of going further into what the title is on you already. So
Hmm.
you can look at the woman at the table as she's just crazy, or you can try to kind of see it from her perspective of maybe she's not crazy, maybe there's something really going on.
Yeah.
And that's just again that hint to there's two paths throughout this entire movie. You know what I'm saying? That they kept that consistent in every aspect of this movie, and it's so great that it's that consistent between everything.
Yeah, I
Right.
think that's what kind of made the movie and the plot so good because once they put you into that situation, it's like now you're trying to figure out is this shit actually like going on? Like, is he like what the fuck is going on? That's the situation that puts you in. Like, what
Right.
is going on? Because it's everybody's around here acting suspicious. The lady writes some shit on the thing that says run. Why am I running? The fucking lady in the cave saying she used to be a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of shit that's there, and it's like, what the fuck is going on? What's actually the truth? What's happening? What is this
Right.
building to? And so I think that's what makes the movie so good.
So it was really insidious, and I think we should open this up because this is kind of like the real bare bones of like what this movie is about. I think it's like, uh, some aspects. Okay, assuming that like he is crazy, some
Mm-hmm.
aspects of his lived experience that we got to see on screen are too incredible. I think to just be like he thought of that or thought of this,
Right.
Like
um,
what
well, I think
specifically?
that his interviews with the people who were at the group therapy
Hmm.
with the missing patient, those interactions were extremely lucid. Like it seemed like his personality was definitely bouncing off their personalities, and what they were saying was in respect to him and vice versa. It wasn't like when he talks to the vision of Rachel, and it seems to be this dialogue tree that's run itself a million times, where it seems like they kind of have the same dynamic every time, just with different like kind of content, right? So I think in that sense, right, I wouldn't say, like, for example, that part, the interviews, I don't think him talking to the staff in that place there was like a fabric of like his insanity.
Right.
No, that actually happened. Yeah.
And, the way that they cover for this in terms of, perhaps shedding a revelation that he was crazy all along at the end, they cover it up by saying that it was, when he was at confronting the therapist, right, or Chuck and
Talking about, okay,
Kingsley,
gotcha.
right, when he was confronting them, um, Kingsley specifically said his project was the most elaborate role play, right? So he said that his method of treatment was to allow his patients to maximally live in the fantasy world they construe in their mind.
Right.
But that would mean that from the moment he arrived on the island, right, they have already ascertained what his fantasy is without having ever spoke to him personally or knowing about his personal life, supposedly, right? But they were
No,
already painting,
no,
like,
I don't think so. I don't think that's how
okay,
that went.
okay, and I know why. I think I know why you disagree, but explain it.
Well, I might be, interpreting what you're saying wrong, but
No, it's cool.
so in terms of like his fantasy, so he had been on the island, allegedly he was on the island for 24 months. And so he was there for 2 years. And they said he had like a breakthrough at some point, and then I guess he regressed. And what we're looking at in the movie is what they're claiming is part of his regression. Because they said that he had a breakthrough at some point, and then now
6 months prior.
Yeah, something like that. And they're
Yes.
like, well, now he's regressed back to what he was before, and now they're trying to say, well, we're trying to treat him again, type shit. That's pretty much. So I don't know if I misinterpreted what you were saying, but I feel like you were okay.
You're actually spot on. Because what I was arguing was that certain features of what we see on screen could not have been a fabrication of his mind, because it seemed like there was like a mutual like exchange of the pieces. And so for me, then, taking your view, Slim, when he was like sailing in on the island, he wasn't even on the island yet. What were we seeing at the beginning there?
The problem is they put us in the movie right there. They didn't put us in.
It's like we start in the middle of a story.
We start in the middle of whatever the fuck happened. They didn't tell us. And I think that's also deliberate, because they didn't want us to know, because that's what leads to the mystery.
2 different stories. Yeah.
But there isn't too much mystery. Like for example, right? The mystery would be whether or not he's crazy. It would be what exactly is going on there, and it would be the whereabouts of the mystery patient, right? That seems to be the main 3 lines of question mark for this story. But otherwise, when it's fed to us pretty much either that it happened or it's a fantasy. They're pretty clear about that usually. So for me, right, it seems pretty clear that he was in fact in the army at one point, right? I accept that. It's also clear to me that this profession that he has, like as an investigator or whatever else, at the beginning of the movie, there's no way of really proving that he's not an investigator. It's not until later on where we start having these conversations on screen about fantasy where we can even start to question those things, right? So for me, I think the way that they constructed this movie essentially was that the beginning was supposed to be treated as true, as real, for all intents and purposes. They didn't want us to think everything at the beginning was fake in any sort of sense, right?
Hey, Luno, also, we really didn't start to question it until like the very last scene, pretty much, or the last 2 scenes. And I think that's kind of what it kept up the question, because they put us into the movie with him being an investigator. Throughout the entire movie, he was an investigator. And up until the last scene where they told him, you're a patient here, we still thought he was an investigator.
Me personally, I did.
Yeah, from my perspective, I don't know about you. You just said you. I don't know about Rootz. From my perspective, when I first saw the movie, I feel like I was, the choice for me was he's investigator and they're trying to frame him, or he's not an investigator and he's a patient. So I
Right.
kind of looked at it like that. Either he's being framed and they're trying to like, they're trying to like, get him out of the way type shit. Like he's interfering with whatever they got on or whatever they got going on. And what did I just say? That's crazy. Anyway, so he's interfering with whatever they got going on. And so they're trying to get him out of the way and, act like he's, mentally insane type shit. So for me, it was those two choices.
Let's be clear, though. Getting him out of the way, could it be as easy as putting a bullet in his head if they didn't want any word of what was going on, to reach the outside? Well, his disappearance could be one thing, right? But they're like, no, like if we admit him as a patient, right, it's justified.
There's no question to it.
He lost his mind.
But this is the problem. I feel like if hypothetically, if he was an investigator, putting a bullet into his head would be problematic. Yeah, problematic. So I think that's why they couldn't do that to begin with, even if it was him being framed.
In which they explain that, and this leads to this ties into my theory on the deliberate writing in this movie. So there are things that happen that they want you to be confused, and there are things that happen that they want you to believe either this side or this side. So, for example, there's two conversations that happen in this movie where these are actually my two favorite one-on-one scenes. There's the one-on-one scene with him and the real Rachel, and there's a one-on-one scene with him and George Noyce. So one happened in the cave, one happened in the lighthouse. Right. So the one in the cave, right? That one happens, and they clearly want you to believe this Rachel lady because her story sounds completely believable in the setting that we're in. She was a doctor. She was a high esteemed doctor, she said. And things started to look a little fishy. She starts digging into things, starts finding out too much information. And now she can't leave because these things can't reach the outside world because the things that they are doing that she's coming across are unethical and frowned upon and even illegal in some parts of the world. So everything that she's saying makes sense to the theory of all of this is a front. Yeah, all of this is a front. Something's going on. Even down to have your hands have started shaking. Have you been smoking your own cigarette? Have they been giving you pills? Have you had any drinks since you've been out here? Have you been seeing anything?
Right.
She runs off every single thing that could possibly be them taking control of him and trying to admit him as a patient the same way that she did her, or the same way that they did her. Right. So that's that conversation. Right. Then there's another conversation that happens with George Noyce. Now he mentions George Noyce somewhere in the middle of the movie where he's talking to his partner. And he says that this guy George Noyce, he was a college kid. Something happened to where he got admitted into this place, got out in a year, went back home, went into a bar sometime later, killed 3 people. And went to jail. Asked him if he wanted to go. In court, the judge asked him if he wanted to go to. I don't know if he asked him or it was 2 things on the table. Whether he would go back to
electric chair him, right?
Right, exactly. He asked to die. He said, "I'd rather die than go back to that place." Right. So then he has the conversation with George Noyce face to face. And there's a specific line that is said that comes up at the end of the movie. I can't remember exactly the way it was said or the wording, but and I just so happened to put the subtitles on like 2 minutes before this conversation. I actually at the beginning of the conversation, because it's kind of hard to hear George at the beginning of this conversation, just because he's real like down.
I think I had to
he's sitting on the ground, he's in the corner, he's purposely whispering. So then they start going back and forth, and you see how the wording is for. He says you have to make a choice, and latest, you have to make a choice between your woman, and he says and latest. Now, the way that Teddy interpreted that was he was saying you have to choose between the two, hunting for answers that's going on here, or hunting down the person that you believe was the start of your trauma, which was the apartment being burned down by this guy named Latest. Then that same quote gets brought back up in the final, trying to get this Teddy guy to realize that this is all a phallus. And they said the way they took the and Latest, right? So
Right.
there's a different inflection in which he says it when he's reading it. He says and Latest. So the way he says it then is calling Teddy Latest, calling him by his name. And then they go into further elaboration on that, because then Teddy talks about, well, he was talking about the choice between the two. He said, no, he was calling you by your name. He said, well, what about when y'all beat him up? He said, you did that, which is the same thing that George said.
He
He
said
said,
because
you did this.
you called him he called you latest, and you was trying to get away
Exactly.
from that, so you
But
beat him up.
again, Teddy interpreted it as he was speaking metaphorically, because of
Right.
his actions of him snooping around is why George's face is beat up. When it's no, you beat the shit out of this dude because he called you by your name, and then you're in so much denial of being this person that you beat him up.
Yeah.
And
Pretty
so
much.
that's one of those things where it's the opposing sides and it's confusing. You kind of want to pick a side, but both make sense.
Right.
Well, I have a different perspective of everything. Shall I give it?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, so for me personally, I feel like this is my second time I watched this movie, by the way. And I watched it last year for the first time, and I definitely shared all of the same ideas, theories, thoughts that, y'all got. And I felt like, yo, this shit is amazing. And I also had the thought in my head, like, damn, like, is he really crazy, or is it like, was they lying and this and that? But what happens is, whenever you watch it the second time, it's almost like watching a different movie. Like it's like watching two different movies, because now that you know the plot and the plot twist, you kind of don't focus on what's going on in terms of like the mystery, and you kind of just start seeing other things. And so for me, I was kind of paying attention to kind of everything else, like everything in the background and all kind of shit. And so basically, they kind of like Rootz said, this is written deliberate. So everything was, had a purpose and a reason. And so it was like a little Easter eggs throughout the entire movie that kind of
Sure.
pointed to it. And so what I noticed when I watched it for the second time is the first thing was when they got to the island, Teddy made the comment to the guard or the policeman that, they all, his people seem on edge. And he was like, yeah, we all are. We all on edge right now. And that's kind of like a point to, well, yeah, because they have, I understood from the plot twist that this guy is a mental patient. He's not actually a marshal. And so they also said in the movie that he was the most dangerous patient,
Right.
maybe because of his military background
And they were
things
giving
like
him
that.
looks at the
Yeah,
beginning.
they say they actually say that. They
Yeah.
say
So he was
because
the
you're
most dangerous.
trained, you're the most dangerous patient we have.
Right. And so what I noticed is when he tells them that, yeah, we're all nervous right now, I get the thing, I get the idea, okay, they're nervous because they know he's not a marshal and he's the most dangerous person that they have in this facility. And he's on the loose right now, just walking around free.
Yeah, pretty much.
And so I picked that up, which is something that, when I first watched it, okay, I'm not knowing that because I don't know the plot twist. But when I watched it the second time, I noticed that. And like you just said, Luno, about the looks, it was a lot of that throughout the movie. It was like nervous looks. It was like little remarks and comments that they was making. And it all like kind of goes back to they're not really taking him serious. And I think it came off a lot of times like they were kind of nonchalant about what was going on. Like there was a scene where they was like on the rocks, and they were supposed to be looking for Rachel or whatever, and they wasn't.
And
Like
they
the
were,
guards were
yeah,
just
they
standing
was all
around.
sitting around and shit. Yeah.
And the reason that is because there was no Rachel to find. Like she didn't exist. So when I look at it the first time, it's like some shit is going on. They're not even trying to like, they're covering something up. But then when I go back and watch it again, it's like, okay, they're not looking for her because there's nothing to find. If he's crazy and he made up Rachel, there's nothing to see. There's nothing to look
Right.
for. And so that's kind of what I get from that. Also, like you said, with the conversation with George Noyce, he got a weird name, but they kind of gave it away word for word. They gave away the plot and the plot twist word for word, because what he told him was, when they was having the back and forth, he told him, this is all a game. He said, this is all for you. All of this is for you. And he told him, you're not investigating nothing. You're a rat in a maze, which is literally what they said in the plot twist. They explained he wasn't actually an investigator. He was living out a fantasy that they were allowing him to live out. And so when I first watched it, I didn't notice it. When I already knew what was happening, I listened to it and I'm like, yo, he just said what the fuck the plot twist was. He's not actually investigating anything. So it's like things like that. Like the doctor said, what's his name? Dr. Cawley?
Right. Yeah, Dr. Cawley.
Yeah, he was talking about how the two different methods of treatment that they, had. They was kind of split, him and the other doctor. They were split on how they wanted to treat the patients. And he said something about like he basically told his theory, like what he believed, and it was basically he believed that if you allow the patient to, live out their quote unquote fantasy or what they believe, then maybe you can reach them off that. And so that goes, to the ending, the plot, where he says, you're not actually an investigator, you're a patient. We let you run this for 2 days to see if it would help you, type shit. So I think it was multiple examples and little Easter eggs throughout the movie that you don't catch the first time watching. And I believe that's because you're so intrigued and you're you're looking at it from the perspective of Teddy, I believe. And you're trying to uncover the mystery as he is. Like you're getting the information the same time he is. Whereas when you already know what's going on and you know that he's not actually, he's not actually a marshal, it kind of becomes clearer and you start to notice other things. So I definitely had a different perspective watching it for a second time.
Yeah,
I did have the same exact perspective as everybody else the first time I watched it though.
Yeah, so I would say like the Easter eggs were actually neutral to me. So like I think there's a plausible explanation for and against this man's insanity whenever something happens. I think that him being in the mental institution probably provoked his trauma, right? When he sees people in like shackled like situations or in restraint of any sort of way, it kicks him back to his visions of Nazi Germany, right? So there's definitely an argument to be made that his surroundings there, that environment that he was witnessing, and the way in which he perceived people being treated, kicked him back to what he witnessed back in his military days, right? I think that one thing that is objective, right, is that his snooping around on the outside made it to the inside of this facility somehow. So he was interested in this case. He personally claimed to the therapist that he was interested in this case. He picked the case, and the therapist guy was trying to convince him, no, like they wanted you here. They've done literally everything in their power to get you here, or whatever, right? So at that point, I think the detective guy had the deputy had the insight to kind of look at the situation and be incredulous. Like, dude, everything here seems perfectly molded for you and your particular fucking psychosis about your ex-girl. Like, and then later on, when we have him expose himself as the quote unquote therapist, he says, are you working for this guy? He goes, I'm sorry, man, but I kind of had to. in this
Yeah.
weird way, right? It's almost like he admits that there is some trail to what the main character is talking about, but he sided with the pathologizing, with like placing the label, with like invalidating it, right? And there could be a
Right.
reason for that. It could be the case that he really was his partner, and that, through some sort of negotiation and his compliance with, carrying the body, and also like thinking, okay, like he beat the shit out of that inmate. Like, he wasn't there for the whole thing, so he didn't see him get choked out, right? So he's like, yeah, my boy's losing his mind. Like, I mean, I do think it's fucked up here, but maybe I need to save my own skin because they're not going to let this nigga off the island. You know what I'm saying? So it definitely seems to be equally painted the case from
Well,
what
I'll
I'm
say this,
watching,
Luno.
that
I got.
what was going on was real, and that they pretty much gaslit him into confirming their beliefs, by weaponizing his trauma, and also putting him through like kind of the drugging that was implied by his conversation with Rachel, or whatever
Mhm.
the actual chick's name is.
Well, okay. So I have a question, but I got a statement before that. One thing, too, about so it was Dr. Sheenan or Sheen, whatever his name was. That's the one that they were saying was off the island or whatever. And so, at the beginning of the movie, when he pulled up to the island, there was this thing that happened when dude told him, we need y'all firearms because you can't get in with the firearms. What they did was they had him, Mark Ruffalo, Dr. Sheen, Chuck, whatever you want to call him, they had him try to get his firearm, off his waist, and he kind of struggled with it. He kind of fumbled with it because I think that was also deliberate to kind of paint the picture at the end where, okay, well, he wasn't really a marshal. He's not really a partner or whatever he was claiming to be, because he couldn't even handle his weapon the right way.
But see, the thing for me is, they also provided the backdrop. At least he said explicitly to Teddy that he was new. And even when he told Teddy how long he'd actually
He was
been
new. Yeah.
involved as a marshal, he was actually brand new, right? So it seems to be the case that there is some logical explanation for his fumbling with the gun. Maybe he's not used to clutching a fucking gun, and throughout the movie, it doesn't seem like he even shows much combativeness, or he doesn't seem to have a combative presence in the same way as like Leo's character did, right?
I believe that's because he's a psychiatrist.
I would say that it would make sense if he was a psychiatrist, but it would also make sense if he's a new deputy.
Okay, and I did have one question to ask though. So something that I thought about was the names, the anagrams. How much of a coincidence do you think that is for the names to be anagrams? Like,
which again, that's one of those things that kind of make you have to choose, because
yeah, and
it lines up. I actually paused it to see if that was true, and it was true for all.
Yeah,
So
they're an anagram.
so both names had so there was a name that he thought was real, and then a name in chorus, right, and then there was a name that corresponded with it.
Yeah, so
and then there was a dash between the two, and I actually paused it to make sure maybe they bullshitting. So I paused it to make sure, and I'm like, nah, these are the same shit.
So look, this is what it was like. His wife's real name, which they said in the flashback, his name was Dolores. I mean, her name was Dolores, not his. Her name was Dolores, and so when they put it up on the board, Dolores was the anagram for Rachel Solando, the lady that they were claiming was the lost patient. And so that's what I want to ask you, Luno. Like, what about the anagram? How much of a coincidence do you think that can be on the side of saying like he's not actually insane?
I wouldn't say that it's a coincidence. The reason why I don't think it's a coincidence is partly because of the fact that he met George outside, right? He met George outside, and George fills him in on a number of facts. If I'm not mistaken, George is the one who tells him the name of the killer of his wife.
No.
Right.
No.
You sure?
Yeah, because
oh wait, no. He already knew who it was. He already knew. Because the name of the killer of his wife was the like maintenance guy from his building.
Yeah, because before he even got to George, he told I think it might have been his part. Yeah, it was Chuck. He told Chuck, he was like, Yeah, Andrew Latis. He was like, Andrew Latis is the guy who was the janitor or maintenance man at the apartment where my
Okay.
wife was at, and then he burnt the apartment down. He was a firebug or whatever the fuck he said. And so
Right.
Yeah, he's a firebug.
he did have that name before he got to George.
Gotcha. Okay, so that makes sense then. So he knew them as like somebody in his building, which to me, is perfectly plausible.
You
Fine.
remember they had the flat, like, not a flashback, like the hallucination of him too. The guy with the
Sitting
scar
in the
across his
chair.
face.
Yep. I do
Yeah,
remember that
it
part.
was
And
it was a dream. He actually
Yeah,
had it. So that was like the second parts. That was the second time he went to sleep. So the first time he went to sleep was he was in he was on the top bunk, and I remember because he woke up and like his clothes was all wet and shit, and it was because there was water coming from the ceiling, right?
Mhm.
So that's the dream that he has where he's talking to his deceased wife, and then she starts to decay as if it was from a fire, and then which also leads into thinking that his wife did actually die in a fire, right? Because her back is singed, and then there's ashes falling throughout the entire scene, and
Sure.
then at the end of it, she decays away as if she were burning ashes, right?
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
So then the second one that they have is the whole drawn out thing, and they actually make it seem like it's more of a hallucination than a dream.
They did a good job with that, like making the viewer like have to try to like figure out, like, and like I said, pick a side, because I think
Yeah.
that's what keeps up the suspense. That's what keeps you looking and watching, paying attention, because you have to actually decide for yourself. Because they didn't, like you said, they didn't actually tell us whether or not it was real or not. But the fact that you have to pay attention and see what's going on, try to uncover clues and shit for yourself, I think that's what kind of keeps you drawn to the movie.
That's fair. And but more to the point though, right? Even if that fact doesn't stand, it does stand that he made contact with George on the outside, right?
Right,
Yes.
right.
And assuming that these the head doctor and all the clientele and the staff there know about him, right? It could be the case that information about him snooping from the outside came back with George, right? As he was, he suddenly did a crime to get back after being released, right?
Mhm.
It seems like it's a way in which he could have came back and just reported, this guy who's looking into what's happening here or whatever. And I know some stuff about him because he's vented to me, this is his past and like this is his traumatic history. And if we can do the right things to probe those trauma associations, we can nap him just like we've napped people here, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of more or less what's going on. I think that they gave it away in the small chapel during the storm. They basically knew about him, they set the conditions, and they've been stirring him up. And the funny thing too about that is that he showed the exact same denial when people told him that he was crazy, to the
Mhm.
fact that he wasn't crazy and he was being orchestrated.
Yeah, and I think that's a good, you know, they did that well too, trying to keep the mystery up. I feel
Because
like
when he was presented with the idea that they set the conditions for him and that they were just like kind of role playing, at the time he refused it because he knew there was something more going on. He was riled up because of all of his thoughts about the ex chick and thinking about what's the guy who burned down the apartment's name again?
Andrew Latis.
And
Andrew Latis.
latest. So he had these obsessions that were brewing when he arrived. The note placed um under the floorboards, right, in the escapee's room.
What's I think it said what's law for, and
What is
Law
the
who
law?
for
is the 67 or who
who is
is patient
67?
Who is
67?
who is 67 is all it said. But
Right.
Yeah,
right, but this is a really interesting way of getting him because first of all, it's a way of saying one, right? Because when he breaks in on the meeting between all the officials, he's like,
yeah.
"There's only 66 patients here. There is no 67." Right?
Uh-huh.
He denies it, but then he's like, no, there's no 67. No, there must be one. Like there has to be a reason why by who is 67. There has to be a 67, right? They needed
Mm-hmm.
him
Uh-huh.
to think that there was one exception to everything that was going on. It was a perfect
Uh-huh.
foreshadowing for him being that one, and they knew that.
And and then there's again speaking to them being deliberate, right? There's another part that plays on the side of this is all a farce, right? So the next meeting that he doesn't walk into, he's kind of snooping through a little bit, and then he walks into I guess the lobby area while they're exiting a room where they clearly just had a meet with everybody, and there's like a few select patients, the two patients that they had spoke to that he had interrogated before, and then there's a bunch of workers there and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And this was right after he had the conversation with Rachel, and he couldn't find Chuck. He had thought Chuck had was pushed off or jumped off the cliff or whatever, and then he couldn't find him. Right. So during the conversation that he's having with Dr. Cawley, he's looking at the people in the background, and people are clearly talking about him and trying not to make eye contact while they're talking about him. Or there are people that are clearly looking at him with a sinister type of stare, things like that. And then there's which I was just looking at her name. I think her name was Bridget, the one, the first patient that he interviewed. And it seems that she's in some type of distress, which that kind of speaks to maybe she's in on it too, but she doesn't like what's going on.
Well, here's the issue, right?
Which
that patient that he interviewed at first, who they claimed was the one that escaped, she did a really good job of mirroring this guy's trauma, right? She walked up to him, kind of did these affectations and said, "Do you know how lonely I've been?" Almost like they knew that he was dreaming about her, right? Almost like they knew like the experience he was going to have there was going to make him think about like what was going on. And he's holding her and he makes the slip, and they kind of knew they got him, right? Because he's like, "Rachel, it's going to be okay." Right. Like that ain't Rachel, at least as far as you're concerned.
Yeah.
Right. So, again, too much of these situations, including that one and the one I was describing before, it seems like his experience there, his treatment by those people was all too doctored in relation to what was going on with him. They needed to have known prior for it to be such a perfect farce, right? And there's evidence to say that there was contact with the outside sufficient for them to pretty much know about this guy before he got there, especially if one of the inmates was directly, responsible for what happened in that fire. It could be the case that Latest actually was an inmate there, but much in the way that they silence a lot of the report and the remarks of people who are there by denying it as crazy, maybe even that was a layer of it too. The submission, suppressing of Latest, the suppressing of like that patient. Maybe Latest is 67, right?
But again, in that same scene that I was talking about, at the end of that scene, well, somewhere in the middle of that scene, he said he's looking for his partner. And then Dr. Crawley says, "You came here by yourself." And which that was one of the pieces that I remember from my times of kind of seeing pieces of it in the past, which kind of leads me more so to believe that this is set up and they're trying to set him up. They're trying to allow him to trick himself into being a patient and then being able to admit him based off of things that he did. You know what I'm saying? So at the end of it, he says, Dr. Cawley says, "Now tell me some more about this partner of yours." And Teddy's reply is, "What partner?" Because it's like, I ain't gonna let you get me like that.
Well, you're talking about the last scene?
No, not the last scene. The scene where they walk in. Well, where he walks in and they walk out of some double doors and everybody's standing on one side and he's standing on the other side talking to the doctor. So there's just so many things that speak to the plot itself. And they did such a great job with keeping everything in suspicion and mystery. You know what I'm saying? In which there's one last thing that I've been thinking about literally since I got done with the movie, right? In the very last scene, after he's come to the realization, quote unquote, of I'm Andrew Latest. You know what I'm saying? He's sitting at the steps. He sees the doctor off in the distance. He sees everybody, going on like it's a regular day, and he's sitting on the steps as if he's been here before, as if he's actually come to the realization that he is a patient there, and Chuck is his therapist and
Psychiatrist.
all of these
Yeah.
things, right? Psychiatrist, right? So
Mhm.
then the conversation between him and Chuck starts,
Right.
and he, if you notice, Chuck refers to him as boss throughout the entire movie,
Mhm.
in which that's a correlation to maybe that's just what their relationship was. His therapist kind of, gave him
Played the
the
role.
reins to kind of, take charge of his situation. By saying you're in command. You can control this more than anybody else can. We just give you the tools in order to do so. So they start that conversation, and he says,
Which
"So what's?" Teddy says, "So what's our next move?" And he said, "I don't know. You tell me, boss."
Mhm.
And then he looks around and he says,
so we can get out this
"We
out.
got to figure out. Yeah, we got to figure out how we can get off this island." And
Yeah.
then Chuck looks over at the doctor and he kind of shakes his head. Is like, yeah, this shit ain't work.
Yeah.
Like we fucked up. This shit ain't work.
Which led to the
So
lobotomy. That they went to the lobotomy in the fucking
right,
tower. They walked off to the
right.
lighthouse.
But okay, so boom, right before he does that, right, there's something that
Mhm.
he says that kind of sparks Chuck, and he's like, oh shit, maybe it did work.
Which one would
He
be worse,
says,
live as a monster or to die as a good man?
exactly, or to die as a good man, in which that's been in my head all day, right? And
Yeah.
he jumps up. He's like, "Oh shit! I think
Yeah,
he
and
actually. I
he
think it
called him.
actually worked."
He called him Teddy, and he didn't turn around when he didn't turn around at all.
Right,
he
and
just kept
I
walking.
was just like, "Holy shit!" Like, and so like that at least makes me think that he has come to the realization that he killed his wife back in 52 because his wife killed his children. And he feels that he was at fault for his wife being like that and it having a direct impact on the lives of his children because she had said he had all the signs that said that his wife was crazy. She said there's a bug crawling across my
Pulling on
skull
the
and I can
fucking
feel it,
yeah,
pulling on shit. And
yeah,
and so that again that trails back to Leatus is the person who killed my wife, but he's Leatus. And the realization of him being Leatus, he says to himself, "I enabled this. I
yeah,
helped this go on by not getting her help.
yeah.
So I
Yeah, I
deserve
kind of had that same.
everything that comes to me."
I had that
Yeah.
same kind of thought because when I first saw it, I definitely that was like the shit that kept it open ended for me. And then when I just saw it
Mm-hmm,
again, it's like okay, I had the same thought you just had, and the
mm-hmm,
way I see it is that he did that purposely, like you said. He kind of pretended purposely like it didn't work. But what I actually think it was that the phrase, which one is worse, to live as a monster or die as a good man, is because he considers himself a monster currently because he has come to reality and he's accepted it and he feels guilty about
mm-hmm.
what happened. Because like you said, his wife told him that, I'm fucked up in the head, and he did not get her help. And that led to his children being murdered. And then he killed his wife or, after that. And so I believe what happened was he chose to get lobotomized because what they said with the process of the lobotomy is they remove your memory and you forget everything. And I think
Yeah.
that's what he meant by die as a good
Oh,
man.
to
Like,
die as a good man, right?
yeah, he's gonna forget everything that fucking happened because he feels guilty about it, and he's just gonna go about the rest of his life not remembering, believing that he's good, he didn't do anything wrong, this and that. And so that's what
Mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm.
took from that, kind of similar to what you did.
Right. So I think I'm just generally more in like a kind of psychoanalytic view on this movie where I think that they succeeded in kind of like making him change his frame of reference and making him believe in what they were suggesting. And I think at the end, I think he just chose death generally to like end his misery
It
with the
wasn't death
memories.
though. It wasn't death. It was just you remember they mentioned the lobotomy shit where they was like it takes out a person's memory or whatever, and they was like, nah, that would take years
I
to
guess I
do.
mean
Like,
it more in like a metaphorical sense because I
okay,
think
yeah, yeah,
once
yeah,
you go to the lighthouse, it's a point of no return. People who go into the
basically,
lighthouse,
yeah,
at least according to how what his figment Rachel in the cave said,
Mm-hmm.
she said that people who go there or whatever are reduced to like zombies or something akin to that or whatever. They remove
Mm-hmm.
parts of the brain and shit like that, right? So there's a way in which like if he goes through that, whoever he is right now is going to cease to exist, right?
mm-hmm.
Um,
In
and
which,
I
sorry,
think that's
I want to
really what the
interrupt you,
end.
but just to kind of agree with that, there's also his hallucination of his wife in the lighthouse. Before he goes in the lighthouse, he says, if she says, if you go in here, it will be the end of you.
Yeah,
So everything he knows himself to be, which is, we are our memories. And they speak to this too. We are our memories. The memories of a human is what makes them who they are. You know what I'm
yeah.
saying? So her saying you going in there will be the end of you. I think that speaks to the same death that you're speaking of, Luna.
And then when they told him, like they kind of revealed it to him, they're like, "You're not a marshal, you're a patient." She popped back up and was like, "I told you not to come in here," type shit.
Right.
Oh yeah, they did do that. Hey, Luno,
Yep.
I got one question before we we can probably cut it off, but I got one question to ask you about for your plausible deniability case. So there was um at the ending scene where they was kind of trying to reveal to him that he was not an investigator, he was a patient or whatever. Something I noticed was he had been having dreams and hallucinations and shit about his family, his wife, his kids, and everything. But I don't think he ever really spoke about that out loud. But there was in the scene where he was talking to Dr. Crowley, they had pictures of his children, and he showed them the
Mhm.
pictures of his children. And so what I think is, I think it would probably be kind of difficult to fabricate that. Like, hypothetically, if he was really an investigator and they brought him there purposely in the 1950s, I think it would be kind of difficult to fabricate the guy knowing what his children look like and being able to have pictures of them to show them and bring back memories and things like that,
Right.
versus him being a patient there and there's like documents and files of what he did to his children in the past, and that's what led him. No, he didn't do it to his children, my bad. His What he did to his wife, and also having his the pictures of his dead children. And I believe that would probably be more of a possibility. But what's your what you think about the picture thing?
I would just say that with respect to the pictures, there's probably some way in which they could have acquired them. It is a fact that his children did die. At the beginning of the movie, it's his understanding that it is Rachel, whoever, I'm saying the escape patient who killed her own kids or whatever, right? So it doesn't even really have
Mm-hmm.
to do with him at first. Um, but there's a phenomenon in psychology, right? Um, it's called false memory syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Okay. So I'm going to read it here for you. False memory syndrome is caused by memories of a traumatic episode. Most commonly, it's like childhood sexual abuse.
Mhm.
But for like veterans, it's usually like about war. Or for widows, it's about like the deceased, right? So the false memories are objectively false, but the person strongly believes them. And so these pseudo memories usually arise in the context of um, like novel situations. So you'll be in a new situation and then maybe it revives like a kind of like trauma that you had. And then what
Mhm.
you'll do to defend yourself from that trauma is to force yourself to conform to a different way of thinking as an act of
So basically,
self-preservation.
like you kind of rewrite the memory so that it's not
Yeah,
as painful.
exactly. So I would say that what might be the culmination of all this is that at the end, when he wakes up finally after that whole entire spiel in the fucking office or whatever, he gets up and it's almost like he's hit with a revelation. But to me, it seems like identification with being Andrew, right? For him is finally his release from the confusion, from the pain, all that associated with his wife's passing, as well as all of his sins in war, right?
Mm.
So that's pretty much where I'm looking at it from. And so any means that they use to uncover more about this guy, I think we're all pretty much intentional. But maybe that's because I'm a little bit biased because I am, a psychology student. And so I know that stigmatizing or like putting a label on somebody is about like damaging is like canceling somebody in our culture, for example, right?
Mm.
Once you're crazy and everybody around you is convinced to look at you as crazy, anything you say gets thrown out the window, right? And
Yeah.
I think that the characters in the movie acted on that, knowing that full damn well, so but it could go both ways. Overall, that shit was a wild movie, and that shit had my, what I'm saying, my mind active.
Yeah, it was fire.
Yeah.
So let's
Like
get to the ratings,
like
man. Go ahead, Roots. We can get to the ratings after that.
Nah, I was just gonna say, like, usually, like, I think we all do this whenever we're watching a movie or watching TV or something. We're kind of back and forth in our phone. Like, my phone sat on the couch next to me the entire time. At no point in time did I pick up my phone and go
Yeah,
to
it's
text
one of those.
somebody or anything. Like I was literally full intent watching this movie.
Right.
Not even just for the sake of doing this, but I was fully invested into this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Same here.
All right, man. Luno, man, what you got for it?
Wild movie, beautiful instrumental backdrop, amazing music, well shot, really good setting, plot, very cool. The open-endedness to it made it extremely interactive. Great acting by all involved. A lot of layers to the movie. It's rewatchable. And it's really almost impossible for me to poke holes in this movie from its
Mm.
structure. It seems like it's an extremely well made, thought out piece. So for Shutter Island, on my first watch, it's getting an 8.8.
Roots.
I said before we turned the recording on, I didn't want to do this because it just seems
Yeah, you told me
wrong.
that. Mm-hmm.
It seems wrong, but there's nothing in my eyes wrong with this movie. There's no places of error. There's no lazy writing. There's nothing that you would say negative about a movie I have to say about this movie.
Mm-hmm.
So it is. I'm sorry. I gotta give it a 10. I'm sorry. I have to give this movie a 10. I saw
First 10 in
nothing wrong
Real
with this
Rap
movie.
Coalition
I'm
history.
The first 10,
going to
man.
refer this. I'm going to refer this movie to every fucking body I know that hasn't seen it. Like, and I'm gonna probably watch it again within the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
And
All
that's
right.
the fastest I've ever returned to a movie.
Now, when you watch it again, make sure, keep in mind what I said. Watch it from the other's perspective, because off my first watch, it was amazing. My second watch, uh, it was a little different for me because I feel like I kind of took into account more details than I did the first time. Like things that I saw as like minor details, or I didn't really think of as big of a detail when I first saw it. It became more of a thing to me, where it was like, damn, they kind of just pointed this out right in our face and we didn't see it. And so, for both watches, I'm gonna give it a rating for both watches, man. I'm between 8.5 and a 9, man. I might go 8.75, man. I'm gonna go 8.7, man. So let me add that up. And we got a final score of a 9.2. 9.2, man.
Jesus.
This
Highest
one
score so
was
far, man.
this one was a crazy watch, man. I'm glad that we got this pick, and I don't even know who goes next, to be honest.
It's me.
Oh
And
shit!
yeah, also highly recommended. So for me, I had a few movies that I was contemplating. I didn't really know which one to pick. So I'm really just shot in the dark with this one. I'm gonna say 2011, The Lincoln Lawyer. starring Matthew
Oh,
McConaughey.
this gonna be fire. I fuck
This
with
will definitely be
Matthew
fire.
McConaughey.
Who
I've
else in the
never seen
comments
this
saying
movie,
that
but
movie, bro?
I've never seen that movie, but I very much enjoy seeing movies with Matthew McConaughey in it, even if it's a small part. For example, his little 5 minute scene in Wolf on Wall Street. He's extremely entertaining, and I really can't wait to watch this movie.
All right, man. Well, that's all for this one, man. Episode 4 of the Real Rap Coalition. We just did Shutter Island. We'll be back next week with a movie that I picked, The Lincoln Lawyer.
Wow. Wow.
We
All
out
right,
this
man.
bitch,
We out of
man.
here.